The sound of mocking laughter cut through the crisp Montana air, sharp as the autumn wind that swept across the plains. Eleanor Adams kept her gaze fixed on the weathered floorboards of Whitridge's general store, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation crawl up her neck as Sarah Miller's voice rang out behind her. "What's wrong, Eleanor? Cat got your tongue again." Sarah's words were followed by the tittering of her friends. "Lord knows how you'll ever catch a husband when you barely say 2 words a month." Eleanor clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles whitening as she counted silently to 10. It was 1879, and at 22 she was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood in this frontier town. Her silence, born from a stutter that had plagued her childhood and the subsequent ridicule it had brought, had become both her shelter and her prison. "Leave some sugar for the rest of us, Eleanor," Sarah called out as Eleanor reached for the last bag on the shelf. "Though I suppose you don't need to sweeten your conversation much." Eleanor placed the sugar in her basket without turning around, her throat tight with unspoken words. Mr. Hawkins, the shopkeeper, pretended not to hear the exchange as he tallied her purchases. His kindness, if it could be called that, was to ignore her humiliation rather than intervene. "That'll be 73 cents, Miss Adams," he said, his voice deliberately loud to drown out Sarah's continued comments. Eleanor nodded, carefully counting out the coins from the small purse her father had given her before his passing last winter. Now it was just her and her aging mother on their modest homestead outside town. She slid the money across the counter, still avoiding eye contact. The bell above the door jingled, and the store fell suddenly, blissfully silent. Eleanor sensed rather than saw a change in the atmosphere, a palpable shift that made her curious enough to risk a glance up. A man stood in the doorway, tall and trail-worn. Dust coated his boots and the lower part of his denim pants. A weathered hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wasn't from Whitridge. Eleanor would have remembered him. "Afternoon," he said, his voice deep and unhurried with a slight drawl that marked him as being from somewhere further south. "Welcome to Whitridge, stranger," Mr. Hawkins called out. "What can I help you with today?" The man stepped fully into the store, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "Name's Declan Blackwell, looking to restock before heading north." Eleanor gathered her purchases, intent on slipping out unnoticed while Sarah and her friends were distracted by the newcomer. But as she turned to leave, her elbow caught the edge of a precariously stacked display of canned goods. The cans clattered to the floor with a deafening racket that made her want to disappear into the floorboards. "Well, look who's making noise for once," Sarah said with a laugh. "Though I suppose that's the only way Eleanor knows how to make herself heard." Eleanor dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the scattered cans, her cheeks burning hot with embarrassment. "Allow me, miss," came the stranger's voice, much closer now as he crouched beside her. His hands, strong and tanned from outdoor work, gathered cans efficiently. Eleanor kept her eyes down, managing a quick nod of thanks. "Not much for talking, are you?" he asked, but his tone held no mockery, only a gentle curiosity. Eleanor risked a glance up, meeting eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. Something in his gaze made her want to attempt speech, but fear kept the words locked behind her lips. She managed another small nod. "Well," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face, "some folks talk too much and say nothing at all. Reckon your silence is worth more than that." Eleanor blinked in surprise, unused to such understanding. The stranger Declan stood and offered her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. His palm was calloused but warm against hers. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Blackwell," Mr. Hawkins called out. "Don't mind our Eleanor, she's just the quiet sort." "Nothing wrong with that," Declan replied, his eyes still on Eleanor. "Some of the best conversations I've had didn't need words at all." Sarah snorted from her position by the fabric bolts. "Good luck with that. You'd have better luck getting conversation from a fence post." Eleanor flinched, withdrawing her hand from Declan's and gathering her purchases. "Madam," Declan said, addressing Sarah with cool politeness, "where I come from, it's considered poor manners to speak unkindly of others." Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, unused to being called out for her behavior. Eleanor took advantage of the moment to slip toward the door, but Declan's voice stopped her. "Miss, you forgot this." He held up the bag of sugar she'd come for. She turned back, reaching for it with a grateful nod. "Your silence," he said quietly, just for her ears, "is like a song in all this noise." The words settled over Eleanor like a warm blanket on a cold night, unexpected and deeply comforting. She met his eyes briefly, allowing herself one small, genuine smile before hurrying out the door. The autumn air felt fresher somehow as Eleanor began the mile-long walk back to her homestead. The basket was heavy with supplies, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She replayed the stranger's words in her mind. "Your silence is like a song." No one had ever described her quietness as anything but a flaw before. She was halfway home when the sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Eleanor stepped to the side of the road, keeping her eyes forward as was her habit when encountering others. "Miss Adams." The voice was already becoming familiar. She turned to find Declan Blackwell atop a sturdy bay gelding. "I thought you might appreciate a ride home with those heavy supplies," he said, dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "That is, if you don't mind the company." Eleanor hesitated. Accepting a ride from a man she just met went against everything her mother had taught her about propriety, yet something about his straightforward manner put her at ease. She nodded her acceptance. "I'll take that as a yes," he said with a small smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He secured her basket to his saddlebag before helping her mount, his hands respectful but strong at her waist. Once she was settled, he took the reins and began walking beside the horse. "I hope you don't mind me saying so," he said after they'd gone a short distance, "but those ladies back at the store weren't very kind to you." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the saddle horn. She debated whether to attempt speech, weighing the fear of stammering against her desire to respond to his kindness. She swallowed hard and decided to risk it. They never are," she managed, her voice rusty from disuse. Declan looked up, surprise and what seemed like pleasure crossing his features at the sound of her voice. "So you do speak?" Eleanor nodded, emboldened by his reaction. "And not often. I stutter sometimes. We all stumble over something," he replied easily. "I've got a friend who can't tell north from south even with a compass in his hand. Makes for interesting trail rides." A small laugh escaped her before she could catch it, the sound surprising even to her own ears. "That's a nice sound," Declan said, his eyes crinkling again. "Your laugh." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but it wasn't the burning embarrassment she was accustomed to. This warmth felt different, pleasant even. "Where are you headed?" she asked, the words coming a little easier now. "Montana Territory, north of here. Got a job offer from an old army buddy who started a ranch up there." He patted the horse's neck. "Thought I'd try my hand at something steadier than drifting. You were in the army, cavalry, served 6 years after the war, been working cattle drives since then." Eleanor nodded, trying to imagine the life of constant movement. Her own world had been confined to Whiteridge and the surrounding area her entire life. "What about you, Miss Adams? Have you always lived in these parts?" "All my life," she confirmed. "It's just me and my mother now. My father passed last winter." "I'm sorry to hear that," Declan said, genuine sympathy in his voice. They approached the turn-off to her homestead, a narrow dirt track leading to the modest cabin visible in the distance. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney, signaling her mother was home and likely preparing supper. "That's our place," she said, gesturing toward the cabin. Declan nodded, guiding the horse onto the path. "Looks like good land. It's not much, but it's ours. We manage." As they approached the cabin, the door opened, and Eleanor's mother stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Margaret Adams was a slender woman with gray streaked hair and the same delicate features as her daughter, though years of frontier hardship had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth. "Eleanor," she called, concern evident in her voice at the sight of her daughter arriving with a stranger. Declan helped Eleanor dismount before introducing himself to Mrs. Adams with a respectful tip of his hat. "Declan Blackwell, madam. I met your daughter in town and offered her a ride home with her supplies." Mrs. Adams's eyes darted between them, wariness gradually giving way to tentative gratitude. "That was kind of you, Mr. Blackwell. Eleanor, did you thank the gentleman?" "She did, in her own way," Declan answered before Eleanor could respond. "You've raised a polite daughter, Mrs. Adams." Something in the way he spoke defending Eleanor's quietness without calling attention to it made her heart swell with an unfamiliar feeling. "Would you care to stay for supper, Mr. Blackwell?" Mrs. Adams offered, surprising Eleanor. Her mother rarely invited strangers to their table. "It's nothing fancy, just rabbit stew, but there's plenty." "I'd be honored, madam, if it's no trouble." "None at all. Eleanor, show Mr. Blackwell where he can wash up while I set another place." As Eleanor led Declan to the water pump at the side of the house, she felt strangely comfortable in his presence, despite having known him less than 2 hours. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "Mother just feels obligated because you helped me." Declan pumped water into the basin before answering. "I'd like to stay if you don't mind my company." He splashed water on his face and hands. "Unless you'd rather I go," Eleanor shook her head. "No, I'd like you to stay too." His smile in response warmed her more thoroughly than their wood stove on the coldest winter night. Supper was a revelation. Eleanor watched in amazement as Declan drew her mother into conversation with tales of his travels that had Mrs. Adams laughing in a way Eleanor hadn't heard since before her father's illness. More surprising still was how he included Eleanor in the conversation without pressuring her to speak, acknowledging her nods and smiles as valid contributions. "What brings you to Whiteridge, Mr. Blackwell?" Mrs. Adams asked as she poured him a second cup of coffee. "Just passing through on my way north," he replied. "My friend Daniel has some land near Helena, wants help building it into something worthwhile." "You plan to settle there permanently?" Mrs. Adams's tone was casual, but Eleanor recognized the subtle assessment beneath it. "That's the hope," Declan said. "I've had enough of drifting, time to put down some roots." His eyes met Eleanor's briefly across the table, and she looked down at her plate, suddenly very interested in the remains of her stew. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor found herself wishing it could continue. Declan's presence had transformed their small cabin, filling it with warmth and easy conversation that had been absent since her father's death. "I should be getting back to town," Declan said finally, rising from the table. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Adams. The stew was delicious." "You're welcome anytime, Mr. Blackwell," Mrs. Adams replied, and Eleanor could tell her mother meant it. Eleanor walked with him to where his horse was tethered, the night air cool against her skin. Stars blanketed the sky, brilliant pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today." Declan turned to her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I meant what I said in the store. There's value in your quiet," Eleanor swallowed hard. "Most people don't think so. Most people don't listen properly." He secured his hat on his head. "I'll be in town for another day or two before heading north. Maybe I'll see you again before I go." The question held no pressure, only a gentle hope that made Eleanor's chest tighten with a feeling she couldn't name. "Maybe," she agreed, surprising herself with how much she wanted that to happen. Declan mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Good night, Eleanor Adams." "Good night, Declan Blackwell." She watched him ride away until he was swallowed by the darkness, the rhythm of his horse's hoofbeats fading into the night. The following morning, Eleanor woke with an unexpected sense of anticipation. As she completed her usual chores, gathering eggs, milking their cow, helping her mother with breakfast, her thoughts kept returning to Declan. Would she see him again? What would she say if she did? "You're different this morning," her mother observed as Eleanor hummed softly while washing the breakfast dishes. Eleanor paused, dishcloth in hand. "Am I? You haven't hummed since you were a little girl." Mrs. Adams studied her daughter with knowing eyes. "Mr. Blackwell seems like a good man." Eleanor focused on scrubbing a stubborn spot from a plate. "He was kind. Kindness is rare enough these days." Her mother took the clean plate to dry it, "And he didn't seem bothered by your quiet nature." "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "He wasn't." Mrs. Adams patted her daughter's hand. "Your father and I always worried about you, you know, not because there's anything wrong with being quiet, but because others can be so cruel about differences." Eleanor thought of Sarah Miller's mocking words in the store. "They still are." "Yes, but you've found your strength in it. I've watched you build a wall of silence that protects you." Her mother's expression grew thoughtful. "But walls keep people out, Eleanor, even the good ones." The words stayed with Eleanor as she went about her day. By mid-afternoon, she had made a decision. "Mother," she said, wiping flour from her hands after finishing the bread dough, "would it be all right if I rode into town? We need more coffee, and I thought I might see if Mr. Wilson has any new books." Her mother's knowing smile made Eleanor blush. "Take Penny," she said, referring to their gentle mare, "and be back before dark." The ride into Whiteridge took less time on horseback than on foot. Eleanor found herself scanning the streets as she approached, looking for Declan's tall figure among the usual town residents. She tethered Penny outside the general store and smoothed her simple blue dress before entering. Mr. Hawkins greeted her with his usual nod. The store was empty save for Mrs. Patterson examining fabric for a new dress. Eleanor purchased the coffee quickly, then hesitated. "Mr. Hawkins, have you seen Mr. Blackwell today?" The shopkeeper looked up from his ledger. "The fellow from yesterday. Can't say I have, Miss Adams, though I heard he took a room at Mrs. Everett's boarding house." "Thank you," Eleanor said, gathering her purchase. Outside, she debated her next move. Calling at Mrs. Everett's boarding house would be forward, potentially improper even. Instead, she led Penny down to Wilson's book and stationery, hoping Declan might appear along the way. Mr. Wilson was delighted to see her, as always. Eleanor was one of his best customers despite her quiet nature, or perhaps because of it, she let him talk about his beloved books without interruption. "I've just received a new shipment from back east," he told her excitedly, "including the latest from Mr. Twain that you might enjoy." Eleanor browsed the shelves, selecting a volume of poetry that caught her eye. As Mr. Wilson wrapped her purchase in brown paper, the shop door opened. "Afternoon," came the now familiar voice that made Eleanor's heart skip. She turned to find Declan standing in the doorway, surprise and pleasure brightening his eyes when he saw her. "Miss Adams," he said, crossing to her with a warm smile. "I was hoping our paths might cross again." "Hello," she managed, suddenly very conscious of Mr. Wilson watching their exchange with interest. "Are you a reader, Mr. Blackwell?" Mr. Wilson asked, sliding Eleanor's wrapped book across the counter to her. "When I get the chance," Declan replied. "Though life on the trail doesn't allow for much leisure reading." "Well, feel free to browse. I'll be in the back organizing some new arrivals." Mr. Wilson disappeared through a curtained doorway with a discretion that made Eleanor suspect he was giving them privacy. "I didn't expect to see you in town today," Declan said once they were alone. "We needed coffee," Eleanor replied, then felt foolish for such a mundane explanation. "And poetry?" Declan nodded toward her package with a smile. "Words on a page are easier than spoken ones." She met his eyes briefly. "For me, anyway." "I understand that," he said, his voice gentle, "though I admit I've been hoping to hear your voice again." The simple honesty of his statement made Eleanor's cheeks warm. She looked down at the wrapped book in her hands, gathering courage. "Would you like to walk with me? I thought I might stop by the creek before heading home." Declan's smile deepened. "I'd like that very much." They left the bookshop together, Declan waiting patiently as Eleanor untethered Penny. They walked side by side down Whiteridge's Main Street, the mare trailing behind them. Eleanor was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing her in the company of a man, let alone a handsome stranger. "People are staring," she murmured, keeping her eyes forward. "Let them," Declan replied easily. "I'm enjoying the company too much to care." His casual confidence bolstered her own, and Eleanor found herself standing a little straighter as they left the town limits and followed the path leading to Whiteridge Creek. The creek was Eleanor's favorite place, a quiet spot where cottonwoods provided dappled shade, and the gentle burble of water over rocks created a soothing backdrop. She often came here to read or simply to escape the occasional suffocation of town life. "It's peaceful here," Declan observed as they reached the bank, Penny immediately lowering her head to drink from the clear water. "It's where I come to think," Eleanor admitted, settling onto a smooth boulder at the water's edge, "or to be alone without feeling lonely." Declan remained standing, skimming a flat stone across the water's surface. It bounced 4 times before sinking. "I know that feeling. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, surprised by his understanding. "Exactly that." He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "May I ask you something, Eleanor?" She nodded, curious. "Why do you let those women in town treat you the way they do?" The question wasn't what she expected, and Eleanor found herself considering it seriously. "It's easier sometimes to be silent. The more I say, the more ammunition they have." "But doesn't your silence give them power too?" Eleanor plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "Perhaps, but it's the power I choose to give them." She looked up at him. "When I was younger, my stutter was much worse. The more they teased, the worse it became, a cycle I couldn't break." "So you broke it by not speaking at all," Declan said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Not entirely. I speak to those I trust, my mother, my father when he was alive." She paused, then added softly, "You." The admission hung between them, significant and fragile. "I'm honored," Declan said finally, his voice low. "And I understand more than you might think. We all find our own ways to protect ourselves." "What's yours?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed so at ease in his skin. Declan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the flowing creek. "Movement, I suppose. After the war, after what I saw and did, staying in one place felt like drowning, so I kept moving, ranch to ranch, town to town." "But now you're stopping," Eleanor observed, "in Montana." "Yes." He turned to look at her, his expression open. "It feels like time." Something unspoken passed between them, a current as tangible as the creek before them. Eleanor found herself wondering what it might be like to be part of someone's reason to stop moving, to put down roots. "How long will you stay in Whiteridge?" she asked, both dreading and needing the answer. "I plan to leave tomorrow," Declan said. "Daniel's expecting me before the first snow." Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. One day. They had one more day before he would ride out of her life as suddenly as he had entered it. "But plans can change," he continued, his eyes still on hers, "if there's reason enough." Her heart thundered in her chest at his implication. "What sort of reason?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Declan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "A compelling one," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly at his touch, allowing herself to imagine possibilities that had seemed beyond reach just days ago. "I should get home," she said reluctantly, aware of the lowering sun. "Mother will worry." Declan nodded, rising and offering his hand to help her up. Eleanor took it, and this time neither of them seemed in a hurry to let go. He walked her back to where Penny waited patiently, helping her mount with the same respectful touch as before. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "Properly, I mean, with your mother's permission." Eleanor smiled down at him, a full, unguarded smile that felt like stepping into sunlight after a long darkness. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day. Eleanor woke early, anticipation making sleep impossible. She dressed with unusual care in her best dress, a simple but flattering blue cotton that her mother had helped her sew last spring. "You look lovely," Mrs. Adams said as Eleanor nervously smoothed the fabric. "What time did Mr. Blackwell say he would arrive?" "Mid-morning," Eleanor replied, glancing out the window for the 100th time. Her mother's knowing smile only increased her nervous energy. "Eleanor," Mrs. Adams said gently, "it's all right to hope, you know." Eleanor turned from the window. "What if he's just being kind? What if he sees exactly what I see? A beautiful, thoughtful young woman with a heart full of unspoken poetry." Her mother took her hands. Not everyone needs to hear words to understand their meaning. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pulse quicken. She moved back to the window to see Declan riding up the path to their cabin, looking impossibly handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his hat tilted at an angle that suggested careful consideration. Mrs. Adams squeezed her daughter's shoulders. "I'll make myself scarce after a while, give you two some time to talk." Eleanor nodded gratefully, taking a deep breath as a knock sounded at the door. Declan's smile when she opened, it was worth every moment of anticipation. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said, removing his hat. "You look beautiful." She blushed, pleased by the compliment. "Thank you. Please come in." Mrs. Adams greeted him warmly, offering coffee and the freshly baked apple cake Eleanor had risen early to prepare. They sat at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between them. After about an hour, Mrs. Adams rose with a barely concealed smile. "If you'll excuse me, I need to gather some herbs from the garden before the frost gets them." "Eleanor, perhaps you could show Mr. Blackwell the view from the hillside. It's particularly fine today." Eleanor recognized her mother's transparent attempt to give them privacy but was grateful nonetheless. "If you'd like to see it," she offered to Declan. "I would," he agreed readily. The hillside behind the Adams homestead offered a sweeping view of the surrounding countryside, rolling plains stretching toward distant mountains, the ribbon of Whiteridge Creek winding through the landscape. "Your mother was right," Declan said as they reached the crest. "It is a fine view." Eleanor nodded, gathering her courage. "Declan," she began, his first name still new on her lips, "why did you defend me? In the store that first day," he turned to face her fully, "because no one else was, because the way they treated you was wrong." His expression softened. "And because something about you called to me from the moment I saw you." "My silence?" she asked, remembering his words in the store. "Your presence," he corrected gently, "the quiet dignity of it, the depth I sensed beneath your silence." Eleanor swallowed hard. "I'm not always silent by choice." "I know," he took a step closer. "And I don't care if you speak 100 words or none at all. I care about what I see in your eyes, what I feel when I'm near you." "What do you feel?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Like I've been wandering my whole life and suddenly the path makes sense." His honesty was breathtaking. "I know this is fast, Eleanor. I know we've only just met, but in my life I've learned to recognize the things worth stopping for." Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. "And I'm one of those things. The only one that matters right now," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance to write to you from Montana, to visit when I can, to see if what I feel growing between us might become something lasting." Eleanor took a deep breath, summoning courage from some untapped reserve. "Or you could stay," she suggested quietly. Surprise and hope flickered across his features. "Here in Whiteridge," she nodded. "The Harrigan place has been empty since old Mr. Harrigan passed last spring. It's not much, but the land is good, and it's less than 3 miles from here." "Eleanor Adams," Declan said with growing wonder, "are you asking me to put down roots near you?" "I'm suggesting that Montana isn't the only place a man might start fresh," she replied, amazed at her own boldness. "If he had sufficient reason." Declan closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "And would you be that reason, Eleanor?" "I could be," she whispered, "if you wanted me to be." His eyes searched hers, seeming to find the answer he sought. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down until his lips were a breath away from hers. "May I?" he asked softly. In answer, Eleanor closed the final distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something that spoke of promises and possibilities. When they finally parted, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "I'll write to Daniel today. Tell him I've found something worth staying for." "He'll be disappointed," Eleanor murmured, her arms still around his neck. "He'll understand," Declan replied with certainty. "He's the one who always told me I'd know when it was time to stop running, that I'd find someone whose silence spoke louder than any words could." Eleanor smiled, her heart full to bursting. "And did you?" Declan's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed. "Your silence," he said, echoing his words from their first meeting, "is the most beautiful song I've ever heard." 6 months later, Eleanor stood beside Declan on the porch of what was now their home, the former Harrigan place, transformed by Declan's capable hands into a promising small ranch. Spring had arrived, bringing with it green grass, wildflowers, and the completion of the work they'd started over the winter. "Mrs. Blackwell," Declan said, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset, "are you happy?" Eleanor leaned into his embrace, reflecting on the changes in her life since that autumn day in the general store. She spoke more now, her stutter almost gone with Declan's patient encouragement. Sarah Miller's taunts had lost their power to wound her. And most remarkably, she had found her voice not just in speech, but in the confidence to be herself, quiet or otherwise. "Completely," she answered, turning in his arms to face the man who had seen value in her silence and helped her find strength in her voice. "Are you?" Declan's smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway, his lips brushing hers with each one. "More than I ever thought possible." As twilight deepened around them, Eleanor Blackwell knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most profound connections begin in silence, and the most beautiful songs are those written in the quiet spaces between hearts that understand each other perfectly.